Chapter 5, San Quentin Prison, 1972. Bozo sat next to me on the bus ride to San Quentin. He knew I was anxious about coming to this prison and helped comfort my fears by telling me that he had been there before and knew the program somewhat. It was about 3 in the afternoon when we arrived. The bus stopped in front of those famous stone guards, towers at the entrance. There's a gift shop of inmate-made handicrafts just outside the prison grounds. The entrance archway gates are made of thick steel bars that were manually opened and closed to let the bus through. After exiting the rotunda, all our files were retrieved by staff for housing placement. It was decided that we would all go to the hole until we were seen by committee, since we were coming from the hole as solid dead. We were escorted through the archway under the gun tower on the upper yard, a long 15-foot high wall. As we made our way to the hole, Bozo was giving me a running commentary and a personal tour of the place. He showed me where George Jackson had lived and died. He was real informative. The upper yard was covered with a large sloped roof with catwalks all around. A real eye-opener was the fact that everyone on the prison grounds was under the gun 24/7. There's a maze of catwalks in and surrounding the prison. We made a left turn just past the adjustment center, AC, with armed guards keeping a watchful eye the entire time. Then we passed a flight of concrete stairs on the right leading down to the lower big yard. That yard holds approximately 3,000 to 5,000 convicts. This lower yard also has most of the support services, e.g. laundry, library, clinic, etc. We then zigzagged around the canteen to the hole just ahead. We finally arrived at the hole B section after the scenic walk. The hole has to be the bowels of the prison. It has 4 sections and is 5 tiers high. Armed guards pace back and forth on the catwalk, positioned across from the barred cell doors, with the outside wall broken windows as backdrop. B section is ugly and filthy, and the place reeks with an assortment of repulsive odors. Most of the foul smells come from the birds, cats, and rats that have also made B section their home. There must not have been anything such as animal rodent control in those days. Just one big, noisy, nasty, smelly family. As we entered B section, the first tier was a row of cells known as strip cells, which are cells within cells, and were used as further disciplinary action for incorrigible types who won't program/behave. The first door is solid and locked. The second door is a barred door with nothing at all in the cell. The second tier inmates were all NF members with the exception of me. All of the ABs and MAs were on the third tier. There are 100 cells per tier, that I know of. Each cell is 4 feet wide by 9 feet long. One-man cells only. When I lay flat on my bed, my hand could touch the opposite wall. There's a bed, toilet, and a sink. That's it. What you might call a no-frills flat. The door locking device is called a front bar, back bar system. Each bar releases 50 cells in a row at a time. Communication in the hole between inmates is a well-established fishing system. A long string line is wrapped around a small paperback book for weight, with a kite note attached to the book. When the weight gets to the destination, the receiver snags the line and pulls it into his cell. Message delivered. It's primitive, but it works. A couple of hours after I settled into my temporary home, a line landed in front of my cell with a kite attached. It was from DR, Death Row Joe, asking me questions about where I came from and why I was at San Quentin. I filled him in on the details and satisfied his curiosity. About a week later, I went to committee. Little Albert and I were the only 2 approved for mainline GP general population. Before leaving, word came down for me to watch Little Albert's back. Within a day, we were both sent to East Block, 3rd tier, where Albert and I were next door neighbors. East Block was not much different from B section, except that East Block was a warehouse configuration where inmates have 2 possible views. One overlooks the yard, the other is of the bayside. Back in the day, There were no TVs or radios to help take your mind off the boring or more destructive thoughts. Books were available for those who could read. By 3 in the afternoon, program was over. Everyone was in their cells except for one inmate known as a key monitor. A key monitor was a trustee runner who carried a set of keys to everybody's cell for that section. I was really surprised that an inmate was allowed such access to cells, especially considering the security concerns of other inmates. But the key monitor was under constant supervision by armed guards on the catwalk. He was also the only inmate allowed to climb vertically between the tiers instead of using the stairs. I used to do that shit. His play hustle was to sell burritos and sandwiches from leftover food from the chow hall for $1 each. He delivered notes, books, and other materials requested by staff or inmates. After breakfast the next morning, Albert and I went to the yard. I started getting weird vibes. I noticed other people seemed to be staying clear of us like we were lepers or something. Albert must have picked up on it too. He told me to stay clear and that he'd be back in a few minutes. After about 20 minutes, he returned. I asked him where he'd gone and he told me he'd gone to see a guy named Rebel. Rebel was from Maravilla, which is a gang from East Los Angeles, which at that time was allied with the NF. We continued to walk the yard, and I again asked Albert if he was NF. Again, he replied no. And he asked me why I was asking. I told him about the message I had received in the hole about watching his back. Albert didn't seem too surprised when I told him this. Otherwise, the day was uneventful. The next day I noticed Rebel at Albert's door talking in hushed tones. After Rebel left, I asked Albert what was going on. He told me that what he was going to divulge to me was to stay between us in the strictest confidence. He then told me that, in fact, he was an NF member, that he was to make a hit, and that Rebel was his connection for a knife and had told him who the target was. The target was an AB named Animal, who lived about 3 doors down from us. I told Albert I was upset for him lying to me and for not allowing me time to get a knife. He told me not to worry, because Rebel was to bring him a knife later in the day. That night after chow, Albert did get a knife. Everybody knew that after arriving at San Quentin, if you could last 5 days on the yard without anything adverse happening, you would be cleared to go about your business. And our 5 days to make a hit or be hit was about up. It's called prison politics. The next morning was the 4th day on the yard, and we knew something had to be done. The only problem was we couldn't find the target. The rest of the day was normal under the circumstances, so we parted ways for the time being. About 3 in the afternoon, I noticed an individual known as Snake, an American Indian, talking to Albert in a quiet way, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. After afternoon count cleared, we went to dinner and I reminded Albert we had to act and make a hit. Albert informed me that he had given the knife to Snake because Snake had told him Rebel had made a mistake and wasn't supposed to have given the knife to him. I was upset and told Albert so, and said that he shouldn't have given the knife back to Snake. After I spoke my mind, I let it go. We returned to our cells for the rest of the evening. The next morning was day 5 and we went to breakfast. We made our plans to go to the yard that morning. Albert was going to sweat at the lodge. As we headed back to East Block and the Rotunda area, I sensed something wasn't right and stopped at the door. Albert told me to stay in the Rotunda, that he had to see someone on the 5th tier on the yard side of the building. Within a few minutes, I heard a commotion come from the 3rd tier. As I approached the 1st tier, Albert came running around toward me, holding his side, yelling, "I've been hit." He fell into my arms, bleeding. He'd been stabbed. I asked him what he was doing on the 3rd tier instead of the 5th. He told me he had changed his mind and that he was heading back to the cell. I asked him who did it. With labored breathing, he told me it was Animal. Animal just happened to be the target that Albert was looking for. It looked as if he found him. Later, we learned that Snake was an AB, not an NF as Albert was led to believe. Animal and Snake were in the same game. I knew I had to get out of the vicinity and get cleaned up. One thing you never want to do is get caught with blood of any kind on yourself or your clothes, and I looked as if I had just left the butcher shop. Well, that didn't pan out. Staff noticed me and all the blood, cuffed me up and took me to the hole pending investigation on the stabbing. Albert survived his wounds, and a few hours later, with a few stitches and his side patched up, he was also taken to the hole. Kites were flying back and forth between cells, with everybody trying to get the 411 on what happened. Albert sent me a kite asking me not to say anything to anybody about what happened and said he'd take care of it. It really wasn't any of my business anyway. After about a week, the primary investigation cleared Albert and me. We were both allowed to go to B section exercise yard, which consisted of a handball and basketball court facing the bay. I was on the tier that housed NF members, and I went to the NF yard. Some NF members I didn't know came up to me to introduce themselves and to welcome me. They were DR, Joker, Robert, Bozo, Buggy, and Charlie, who were brothers of Babo. Albert was also on the yard. Joker was very likable and had some history behind him. He was the clown of the second tier in B section and helped break the tension when needed. Joker was also known for his drawing of the NF symbol, the knife through the hat, still used today. I think that's Joker from Redondo Beach, Mendoza. He was also the boxing heavyweight champ back in the 60s and full of talent. Robert came over to me and informed me that he had to go to a meeting and that I was not allowed to attend because I wasn't a member. I could see that Albert was the topic of the meeting because he was getting a tongue lashing from the others, presumably for his own fear or near fatal mistake. After about an hour, the meeting broke up. At that time, DR came over to me and was making small talk. I could tell he was interrogating me about what had happened to Albert. Remembering what Albert told me, I told DR that I didn't know anything about Albert's activities leading up to the stabbing. A couple of nights later, the third tier, where the MAs and ABs lived, was noisy with laughter and joking around. A name or two were tossed into the conversation and a loud cheer erupted. Robert sent me a kite informing me that 2 NF members, Diamond and Bullwinkle, had been killed at Susanville a few days earlier. The information was confirmed by a newspaper article. It was a shock to hear about this. These guys that I had known about, guys I considered friends. That night, I reminisced about the good times I had with them, which stirred up a lot of anger at their passing. Later, information about what really happened to Diamond and Bullwinkle trickled down. Word had it that they were housed in dorm 39 at Susanville, with 4 NF living in the same dorm. At night, the 4 NF would take turns standing watch. 2 would sleep while the other 2 stood sentry. Bullwinkle was sleeping in his bunk and Diamond was in the shower. Fat Mike saw 2 inmates coming toward the dorm, but instead of alerting the others of potential danger, he split and, like the coward he was, hid behind some blacks. Ray was unaware of what was coming. The first inmate, Sleepy, went over to Bullwinkle and started stabbing him with such viciousness that Bullwinkle was completely decapitated, with the exception of a vein holding him together. The other inmate, Belon, went to the shower area where Diamond was completely unaware of what was going on. Belon got the jump on him and stabbed Diamond repeatedly in the upper torso. Ray heard the commotion, grabbed a large trash can and started slamming it on Belon to try to get him off Diamond. Belon's adrenaline was pumping though, and he just shrugged off the counter assault, continuing to stab Diamond. At that point, Ray panicked and ran off, leaving Diamond to his demise. Ray's action was considered among the NF to be an act of cowardice. Diamond later died from his injuries, even after being taken by life flight to the nearest hospital. After the dust settled, Ray testified to the murders of Bullwinkle and Diamond. Sleepy and Belon were found guilty and given life sentences. A couple of months later, Pelon committed suicide because he didn't want to do the time. Sleepy is still in a California prison. I think that's Sleepy Escalade. The next day, word came down through the grapevine that an NF member by the name of Woodchunk was transferred from San Quentin to Tehachapi prison. As soon as he arrived there, he was stabbed and killed. He wasn't even out of his transportation jumpsuit when they got him. Because of the murder of Woodchunk and the deaths of Bullwinkle and Diamond, retaliation was in order. Again, this is another MA member that was killed back in these days, and you hear Mundo saying that there was only one Mexican mafia death, that being Cheyenne Cadena. Come on, man. Back at Soledad prison, during the ways of the Godfathers, the gangs could intermingle with each other with such adverse action like going to war, or without such adverse action like going to war. A relative newcomer to the system and an NF member named Cisco was targeted by the MA to be hit because he was trying to get something for nothing. Cisco had a drug habit, which is taboo for NF members if you get caught. Cisco just wasn't thinking. The MA lured him to a cell for a fix, and just as he was putting the needle in his arm, he looked up to see a guy coming down on him with a knife. It stuck him between the shoulder blades. Cisco collapsed right there, and the MA made another hit. If the MA hadn't got him first, the NF would have, because of the drug use. By that time, two other NF members, Chief and Junior, were given the task of hitting two MAs. During a movie night in the gym at Soledad Central, two MAs saw their last cartoon. The bodies were discovered when the lights came back on. Their assailants had disappeared. There you go. There's two more bodies right there. So I guess it just depends on who do you believe. You guys can either say this dude is full of shit, or Mundo is just the go-to guy on all fucking gang historical events dealing with the MA and the NF. Come on, man. Read between the lines. Other things were going on that I was completely unaware of. I was making enemies just because I was on the NF tier. I had friends in both gangs, but I had no idea of the gravity of the situation. I was young and naive, and the politics of the situation were confusing and not easy to accept. Questions rolled through my mind. Why were all these guys getting killed? And why was I not made aware of the conflicts and issues that intertwine with the politics between both of these gangs? Robert explained to me that at one time the MA had been known to pressure New Mexicans that were coming into prison. If you weren't with them, you were subject to be pressured into drug use, sex, or other adverse acts for MA's purposes. Looking back on the way things were, the majority of Mexicans were from Southern California. The NF didn't believe in this kind of treatment for those of their own culture. The NF also believed in letting people do their own thing. They didn't pressure people to join the NF. There was one rule the NF maintained. When and if you accepted as an NF, no matter where you came from or what ethnic group you were part of, you were family for life. That meant loyalty above and beyond homeboys, personal friends, and even family. NF came first. If you were ordered to kill your own brother, sister, mother, or father, this order must be carried out for the family, without question. It sounds harsh, but that was the way it was in those days. It was called survival. An NF member lived and died only for the purpose of the familia. 2 or 3 weeks later, due to committee action and because the captain at San Quentin thought I was too young to be housed there, I was put up for transfer to DVI, Tracy. DVI was for CYA rejects and had a reputation as a gladiator school. I knew when I got to DVI, I would know a lot of guys from CYA and Soledad North. Because of that, I had a lot of anxiety about going there. I tried to nix the transfer, but no luck. A new constitution had been drawn up that would include all families uniting together under one leader from all the prisons throughout the state. As time went on, DR and I got to be friends. He asked me if I knew of a way to get some information to Folsom Prison. I told him I got visits from a girlfriend occasionally and that she might be able to help. DR needed to get a message to Babo through my visitor. The message was that Babo was to be the general of NF under the new constitution. With a new chain of command came a new captain, or first captain, under the new general. Until then, it was a toss-up between a member named Diata, DR, or it was between Diata and DR as to who would be the first captain under the new general. Diata had an edge on DR because Diata had made a kill for the NF and DR had not. Diata had come from a gang called Familia Cinco, Family 5, that was created at California Men's Colony, CMC, at San Luis Obispo in the 1970s. Diata later dropped out of the FC to become an NF member. Even though a lot of members wanted Diata to be the first captain, he didn't want the position. One point in DR's favor was the fact that he wrote the new constitution. About 2 weeks later, Babo sent word to my visitor that DR would in fact be the first captain. Under the new constitution, the first captain would be assigned the duties of head of security over all NF activities throughout the state. As time progressed, DR asked me if I wanted to join the NF. I was having a lot of conflicting emotions and thoughts about that kind of lifestyle at the time. I told him I wasn't interested. After committee recommendations for the DVI transfer, and while I was waiting to go, DR asked me if I'd be willing to take the Constitution and the hit list down to DVI when I went. I didn't have any problem with the request, and I told him I would. I stayed up all night copying the new Constitution and the hit list. I was to give all of this information to an NF member called Peanut from Stockton and pass on the message that he would be a captain at DVI. I asked Robert what DVI was like at Tracy because of all the rumors I had heard. Robert said I would have nothing to worry about. And then he explained, about 2 months prior, Bozo from San Jose was hit and killed while watching a show in the TV room. Mike Boyle from Oakland, my cousin, was with him at the time. Mike ran and didn't render aid when Bozo needed it. So much for Mike's membership. A week later, Weddle from San Diego was hit and killed in the kitchen by some MMA members. A few days later, another NF, Bo, had another attempt on his life when an AB hit him in the head with the pipe. The intention was to bring Bo down, but he shook it off and fought back with a vengeance. Another MMA member slowed Bo down by stabbing him in the chest, puncturing a lung. Bo survived to live another day. Weddle from Ontario was in charge at DVI and was soon to be released to go home. He had no intention of screwing up his release date, or worse, get killed. Peanut, however, was irate about what was happening to the NF members, so he took Weddle's position as leader and declared war on the MA at Tracy. Staff was expecting all hell to break loose at any time. The tension was heavy in the air, and when it happened, bloodshed was everywhere. Exact numbers of casualties were not known, but there were a lot of injuries due to stabs, slashes, and broken bones. A lot of pride was hurt. Peanut had constructed a flawless plan to annihilate the MA and any sympathizers, including the ABs, and erase them from the population. Word had it that Peanut's plan was executed all over DVI with such precision that it would take or make any general proud of his men. The NF cleaned house in one day and earned respect for the NF at the same time. The war was known as the Pearl Harbor of DUI. It said that no MA would ever walk that line again as long as the NFs were there.